Welcome to another journey through the quiet corridors of history. Tonight, we'll explore a world where every morsel of food represented hours of backbreaking labor, where the simple act of eating connected peasant and prince through an intricate web of human effort that spanned continents and social classes. Close your eyes and imagine yourself stepping back 7 centuries, to a time when the rumble of your stomach wasn't easily satisfied by opening a refrigerator or walking to a corner store. In medieval Europe, every grain of wheat, every slice of bread, every sip of ale was the product of countless hands working in fields, mills, kitchens, and markets. The food that sustained medieval society required a vast human machinery of farmers, millers, bakers, merchants, and servants, each playing their part in keeping civilization fed. Tonight, we'll uncover the unseen labor behind every medieval meal. We'll walk alongside the peasants whose dawn-to-dusk toil made survival possible, follow the rise of merchant princes who built empires on spice and grain, explore the mysterious communal systems that bound medieval communities together, and glimpse the elaborate culinary theater that defined aristocratic power. Each story reveals how profoundly different our relationship with food once was, and how the simple act of eating was never simple at all. Let yourself settle comfortably as we begin this exploration. The medieval world was harsh and unforgiving in ways we can barely imagine. Yet within that harshness lay remarkable ingenuity, community bonds, and human resilience. These are stories of struggle and survival, of innovation and tradition, told at a gentle pace that honors both the complexity of the past and your need for peaceful rest. Take a deep breath and let us journey together into the forgotten world of medieval sustenance, where every meal told a story of human endurance and every bite carried the weight of history. The roosters haven't even begun their morning calls when you stir in the darkness of your single-room cottage. The air is thick with the scent of damp thatch above and the warm, earthy smell of the animals sharing your living space. Your ox, 2 pigs, and handful of chickens provide both companionship and essential warmth during the long, cold nights that seem to stretch endlessly through the medieval winter months. Your hands, already rough and cracked from yesterday's labor, throb with a dull ache that has become as familiar as breathing. The cuts and scrapes from handling rough grain stalks and wooden tools never fully heal before new ones appear. You flex your fingers in the darkness, feeling the stiffness that comes from gripping a sickle for 14 hours straight, knowing that today will bring more of the same relentless physical demands. The Lord's grain quota weighs heavily on your mind as you prepare for another day in the fields. Every kernel of barley, every sheaf of wheat belongs first to your feudal master, and his reeve will be watching with sharp eyes to ensure not a single grain finds its way into your own meager stores. The mathematics of survival are brutally simple. Work harder than seems humanly possible, or face starvation when winter tightens its grip on the land. You dress in the same rough wool tunic you've worn for months, its fabric coarse against skin that has learned to endure constant irritation. The garment carries the permanent sense of your labor, earth, sweat, and the mustiness of grain dust that settles into every fiber. Your leather shoes, if they can still be called that, are more patches than original material, held together by careful stitching and the desperate hope that they'll last until you can somehow afford new ones. Outside, the pre-dawn air carries the familiar sounds of a village awakening to another day of survival. Dogs bark in the distance, marking their territory and announcing the movements of early risers. The rhythmic sound of wooden shutters creaking open mingles with the soft lowing of cattle being led to pasture by other peasants whose daily routines mirror your own in their grinding predictability. The fields stretch before you in the growing light, acre upon acre of grain that represents both your family's survival and your perpetual bondage to the feudal system. Each plant has been tended with careful attention throughout the growing season, watered by your sweat and nurtured by knowledge passed down through generations of agricultural workers who understood that their very existence depended on coaxing sustenance from often reluctant soil. The Lord's game laws ensure that hunger remains your constant companion despite being surrounded by potential food sources. Deer, rabbits, and wild birds roam freely through landscapes where peasant families struggle to find enough to eat, but these animals belong exclusively to the feudal nobility. Poaching carries severe punishments, fines that could bankrupt a peasant family, physical punishment that could leave you unable to work, or in extreme cases, death sentences that serve as grim reminders of your place in the social hierarchy. Similarly, the fish that swim in the Lord's ponds and rivers are forbidden to you, even as your children's ribs show plainly through their thin skin during the lean months before harvest. These bodies of water, often artificially created and carefully maintained, represent enormous investments in food production that benefit only the privileged classes while remaining tantalizingly out of reach for those who need them most. The rhythm of agricultural work follows patterns established over centuries, dictated by seasonal changes and the demands of crops that require attention at specific times regardless of weather conditions or personal health. Spring planting begins while winter's grip still holds the land, demanding that you work in cold, muddy fields that seem determined to claim your crude tools and your energy. The wooden plow, pulled by your precious ox, cuts furrows that must be straight and properly spaced despite the uneven terrain and your animal's occasional stubbornness. The preservation of meat presents ongoing challenges that occupy much of your family's mental and physical energy. Salt, precious and expensive, must be used sparingly to cure the occasional piece of pork or beef that comes your way. Every scrap of food must be carefully managed and stored, protected from the rats and mice that see your modest stores as their own buffet. Underground storage pits, lined with stones and covered with wooden planks, hold your winter vegetables in conditions that are constantly threatened by moisture, frost, and the persistent intrusion of hungry rodents. Your diet consists primarily of dark, coarse bread that bears little resemblance to the refined wheat products enjoyed by wealthier members of society. This bread, made from whatever grains you're permitted to keep after meeting the Lord's demands, often includes barley, oats, and sometimes peas or beans ground together to stretch the available flour. The resulting loaves are dense, sometimes gritty with bits of stone from the grinding process, and occasionally bitter from grains that weren't perfectly clean when milled. Pottage, a thick soup or stew made from whatever vegetables and grains are available, provides the bulk of your family's nutrition. This one-pot meal might include cabbage, onions, leeks, turnips, and whatever herbs you can gather from the wild or grow in your small garden plot. On fortunate days, a bit of bacon or salted pork might flavor the mixture, but meat remains a rare luxury rather than a daily expectation. The Lord's game laws ensure that hunger remains your constant companion despite being surrounded by potential food sources. Deer, rabbits, and wild birds roam freely through landscapes where peasant families struggle to find enough to eat, but these animals belong exclusively to the feudal nobility. Poaching carries severe punishments, fines that could bankrupt a peasant family, physical punishment that could leave you unable to work, or in extreme cases, death sentences that serve as grim reminders of your place in the social hierarchy. Similarly, the fish that swim in the Lord's ponds and rivers are forbidden to you, even as your children's ribs show plainly through their thin skin during the lean months before harvest. These bodies of water, often artificially created and carefully maintained, represent enormous investments in food production that benefit only the privileged classes while remaining tantalizingly out of reach for those who need them most. The rhythm of agricultural work follows patterns established over centuries, dictated by seasonal changes and the demands of crops that require attention at specific times regardless of weather conditions or personal health. Spring planting begins while winter's grip still holds the land, demanding that you work in cold, muddy fields that seem determined to claim your crude tools and your energy. The wooden plow, pulled by your precious ox, cuts furrows that must be straight and properly spaced despite the uneven terrain and your animal's occasional stubbornness. Summer brings its own exhausting demands as crops require constant tending. Weeding becomes a never-ending battle fought on hands and knees, your back bent for hours at a time as you carefully remove competing plants that would steal nutrients from your precious grain. The sun beats down mercilessly during these long days, leaving you dizzy with heat and desperately thirsty for water that must be rationed to last through the working day. Harvest time arrives with a frantic urgency that leaves no room for rest or recovery. Every daylight hour must be utilized to bring in crops before weather or pests can destroy months of careful labor. Your sickle becomes an extension of your arm, swinging in rhythmic arcs that gradually fill the fields with neat piles of cut grain. Your back screams with pain from the constant bending and straightening, Your hands blister and bleed from gripping the wooden handle, and your legs shake with fatigue as you push through days that stretch from first light until darkness makes further work impossible. The Lord's reeve watches constantly during harvest, ensuring that his master's share is collected before peasant families can secure their own winter survival. This man, often a peasant himself elevated to a position of minor authority, understands the desperation of the workers he supervises while remaining absolutely committed to protecting his master's interests. His presence adds psychological pressure to the already overwhelming physical demands of bringing in the harvest. Threshing the grain requires additional weeks of backbreaking labor as you separate the valuable kernels from their stalks using flails, wooden implements that demand precise timing and considerable strength to use effectively. The work fills the air with choking dust that coats your throat and lungs, leaving you coughing and gasping while still maintaining the steady rhythm necessary to process the enormous quantities of grain that must be prepared for storage and milling. Winnowing, the process of separating grain from chaff using carefully controlled wind currents, demands patience and skill developed over years of practice. You toss baskets of threshed grain into the air, allowing the breeze to carry away the lighter debris while the heavier kernels fall back into your container. This work, usually performed by women and children, requires perfect timing and considerable physical stamina, as the heavy baskets must be lifted and manipulated hundreds of times to clean even modest quantities of grain. The mill, when you're finally permitted to use it, represents both relief and frustration. The Lord's mill, with its massive grinding stones powered by water or wind, can process grain far more efficiently than your hand corn, but access comes at a cost that further diminishes your family's already meager resources. The miller, another servant of the feudal system, takes his share of your grain as payment for the service, leaving you with even less to sustain your family through the coming year. Storage of processed grain presents ongoing challenges that occupy much of your mental energy throughout the year. Wooden chests and ceramic containers must be constantly monitored for signs of moisture, insect infestation, or rodent intrusion. Every kernel lost to these threats represents a direct threat to your family's survival, making the protection of stored food a constant preoccupation that adds stress to already overwhelming daily responsibilities. Winter months bring different but equally demanding challenges as the cycle of food production continues even when outdoor agricultural work becomes impossible. Livestock require daily care and feeding, consuming precious fodder that must be carefully rationed to last until spring grass becomes available. Your animals represent both valuable assets and constant worries, as their health directly impacts your family's ability to work the fields and produce food in the coming year. The preparation of food during winter months becomes even more time-consuming as frozen conditions make every task more difficult. Water sources may freeze, requiring you to break ice or melt snow for cooking and drinking. Fires demand more fuel to maintain adequate heat for both warmth and food preparation, forcing you to venture into cold, often dangerous conditions to gather wood or other combustible materials. Your wife's work during these months includes the crucial task of spinning and weaving cloth for your family's clothing and household needs. The wool from your sheep, if you're fortunate enough to own any, must be processed through multiple stages: cleaning, carding, spinning into thread, and finally weaving into fabric. This work fills the long winter evenings with productive activity, but adds yet another layer of physical labor to days already packed with survival tasks. The social fabric of your village provides some support and community, but also additional obligations that further complicate your already overwhelming schedule. Collective work projects, such as road maintenance or bridge repair, require your participation regardless of your family's immediate needs. These community efforts, while necessary for everyone's long-term benefit, take time and energy away from your private agricultural work, creating constant tension between individual survival and community responsibility. Religious obligations add another dimension to your crowded schedule, demanding attendance at church services and participation in religious festivals that mark the passage of time throughout the agricultural year. While these activities provide some respite from physical labor and opportunities for social interaction, They also represent time that cannot be devoted to the endless tasks necessary for survival in the medieval agricultural system. The constant threat of crop failure looms over every decision and every day's work, knowing that a single season of poor weather, disease, or pest infestation could mean starvation for your family and many others in your village. This psychological pressure colors every aspect of daily life, making even small setbacks feel like potential disasters and turning every successful harvest into a temporary reprieve rather than a cause for celebration. Your children, as soon as they're old enough to be useful, become essential contributors to the family's survival efforts. Boys learn to handle tools and tend animals, while girls master the complex skills of food processing, textile production, and household management. Childhood, as later generations would understand it, simply doesn't exist in a world where every person's labor is essential for survival and there's no surplus capacity to support those who cannot contribute to the collective effort. The knowledge required for successful peasant life represents an enormous intellectual achievement passed down through generations of agricultural workers. Understanding soil conditions, weather patterns, plant diseases, animal behavior, food preservation techniques, and countless other specialized skills requires a lifetime of learning and experience. Yet this expertise, crucial for the survival of medieval society, receives no recognition or respect from the educated classes who depend entirely on peasant labor for their own comfortable existence. Medical care, when available at all, consists largely of folk remedies and herbal treatments that may or may not provide genuine relief from the injuries and illnesses that constantly threaten your ability to work. A broken bone, infected wound, or serious illness could spell disaster for your family's survival, making every day's work a calculated risk between the necessity of labor and the danger of injury that could leave you unable to provide for those who depend on you. The isolation of peasant life, particularly during winter months, creates psychological challenges that compound the physical hardships of medieval agricultural existence. Limited contact with the outside world, restricted mobility due to feudal obligations, and a constant focus on immediate survival needs leave little opportunity for intellectual stimulation or personal growth beyond the narrow confines of agricultural labor and basic survival skills. Yet within this harsh existence, peasant communities developed remarkable systems of mutual support, shared knowledge, and collective resilience that enabled them to survive and even thrive under conditions that would overwhelm most modern people. The bonds forged through shared hardship created social networks that could provide crucial assistance during times of particular difficulty, demonstrating the human capacity for cooperation and community even under the most challenging circumstances. As you settle into rest after another exhausting day of labor, your body aching from head to toe and your mind already planning tomorrow's necessary tasks, you represent the foundation upon which all medieval society rested. Your invisible labor, multiplied across millions of peasant families throughout Europe, made possible the cathedrals, universities, art, and literature that we remember as the achievements of the medieval period. The bread on every table, from peasant cottage to royal palace, carried within it the story of your struggle, your skill, and your unwavering commitment to survival against overwhelming odds. The medieval peasant's relationship with food was defined not by choice or preference, but by the grinding necessities of production, preservation, and survival in a world where famine remained a constant threat, and every meal represented a victory against hunger, weather, disease, and the relentless demands of the feudal system that claimed the fruits of your labor while offering precious little in return. From the grinding poverty and endless labor of medieval peasant life, we turn now to a different world entirely, one where ambition and commercial genius could elevate a man from humble origins to heights of wealth and power that rivaled kings themselves. Yet even in this rarefied atmosphere of international trade and political influence, the specter of destruction lurked constantly, ready to topple the most magnificent achievements through the machinations of jealous nobles and the treacherous currents of court politics. The story of Jacques Coeur begins in the early years of the 15th century in the modest city of Bourges, nestled in the heart of France. Here, In a world still recovering from the devastations of the Black Death and the ongoing conflicts of the Hundred Years' War, a furrier's son would learn lessons about commerce, ambition, and survival that would eventually reshape the economic landscape of medieval Europe. Imagine yourself walking through the narrow streets of Bourges in the year 1400, where the young Jacques Coeur first opened his eyes to a world defined by careful transactions and the delicate art of transforming raw materials into objects of desire. His father's workshop filled the air with the rich scent of treated leather and carefully prepared furs, materials that represented luxury and comfort to those wealthy enough to afford them. The rhythm of commerce flowed through the household. The careful examination of pelts, the precise calculations of profit margins, the constant awareness of customer needs and market fluctuations. The furrier's trade provided young Jacques with an education unavailable in any university of his time. He learned to assess quality with a discerning eye, to negotiate prices with both suppliers and customers, and to understand the complex web of relationships that connected local craftsmen with distant markets. These skills, developed through years of apprenticeship in his father's business, would prove invaluable as his ambitions expanded far beyond the comfortable boundaries of provincial trade. The political landscape of early 15th century France offered both opportunities and dangers for ambitious merchants willing to navigate its complexities. The ongoing war with England had disrupted traditional trade routes and created urgent demands for new sources of luxury goods, exotic spices, and precious metals. The French court, despite its financial struggles, maintained an appetite for the finest products that international commerce could provide, creating opportunities for merchants clever enough to satisfy these sophisticated tastes. Jacques Coeur recognized that success in this environment required more than simple buying and selling. It demanded the ability to forge relationships across cultural and religious boundaries, to understand political currents before they became visible to others, and to take calculated risks that other merchants might consider impossibly dangerous. His early ventures beyond Bourges taught him that the greatest profits lay not in safe, local transactions, but in the hazardous and complex world of international trade. The Mediterranean beckoned to Coeur as the highway to wealth and influence, its ancient ports offering access to the exotic products of the East that European nobles craved with almost desperate intensity. Spices from distant India, silks from mysterious China, precious stones and metals from lands most Europeans knew only through fantastic tales. These goods commanded prices that could transform a successful merchant into a man of significant wealth and social standing. Establishing his first trading post along the Mediterranean coast required Coeur to master skills that went far beyond commercial expertise. He needed to understand the complex relationships between Christian and Muslim merchants, to navigate the political tensions that constantly threatened to disrupt trade relationships, and to develop networks of trust and cooperation with men whose cultures and beliefs differed dramatically from his own. The ports of Damascus, Alexandria, and Constantinople became familiar destinations for Coeur's agents and ships, their markets offering treasures that seemed almost mythical to European buyers. Here, in bazaars filled with the sounds of multiple languages and the scent of exotic spices, Coeur's representatives learned to distinguish between genuine articles and clever imitations, to negotiate prices in multiple currencies, and to arrange transportation for goods that would travel thousands of miles before reaching their final destinations. The logistics of medieval international trade presented challenges that required innovative solutions and enormous patience. Ships carrying Coeur's goods faced threats from pirates, storms, and political conflicts that could destroy months of careful planning in a matter of hours. Overland caravans moved slowly through territories controlled by various rulers, each demanding taxes, bribes, or protection fees that could dramatically impact profit margins. Yet successful completion of these dangerous journeys could yield returns that justified the risks and financed even more ambitious ventures. Coeur's growing success attracted the attention of the French court, where King Charles VII struggled with the enormous financial demands of governing a realm still partially occupied by English forces. The king's chronic need for money, combined with his appreciation for the luxury goods that Coeur could provide, created opportunities for a merchant with both the resources and the diplomatic skills to serve royal interests. The relationship between Jacques Coeur and King Charles VII developed into one of the most remarkable partnerships in medieval history, demonstrating how commercial success could translate into political influence when managed by a man of exceptional ability and vision. Coeur's loans to the crown, secured by his growing commercial empire, helped finance military campaigns that gradually expelled English forces from French territory. His ability to provide exotic goods and luxury items helped maintain the royal court's prestige during difficult periods when traditional sources of wealth had been disrupted by war. In recognition of his services, King Charles VII appointed Jacques Coeur to the position of Master of the Royal Mint, granting him control over France's monetary system and the authority to regulate the production and circulation of currency. This appointment represented an extraordinary level of trust and responsibility, placing a merchant's son in a position traditionally reserved for members of the highest nobility. The Royal Mint, with its carefully guarded technique for producing coins and its role in maintaining economic stability, became another pillar supporting Coeur's expanding influence. The palace that Jacques Coeur constructed in Bourges stands as perhaps the most visible testament to his remarkable achievements, an architectural masterpiece that combined innovative design with ostentatious display of wealth and sophistication. Unlike the forbidding castles of traditional feudal lords, Coeur's palace welcomed visitors with graceful courtyards, elaborate decorative elements, and technological innovations that demonstrated both his prosperity and his forward-thinking approach to residential design. Walking through the halls of Coeur's palace, you would have encountered treasures gathered from across the known world. Tapestries woven with threads of gold and silver, furniture crafted from exotic woods and decorated with precious stones, artwork that reflected the finest traditions of both European and Eastern cultures. The very air seemed to carry the sense of distant lands. Exotic spices stored in carefully sealed containers, perfumes distilled from rare flowers, incense that spoke of mysterious religious traditions practiced in far-off temples. The palace kitchens revealed another dimension of Coeur's international connections, stocked with ingredients and cooking implements that allowed his chefs to prepare dishes that rivaled those served at royal banquets. Spices worth more than most peasants earned in a lifetime were measured out with casual generosity, while exotic fruits preserved in honey or sugar provided sweetness that seemed almost magical to guests accustomed to the limited diet of medieval Europe. Yet even as Jacques Coeur reached the pinnacle of commercial and political success, the very magnitude of his achievements was creating enemies among the traditional nobility who viewed his influence with increasing alarm and resentment. Hereditary aristocrats, whose power stemmed from ancient bloodlines and feudal obligations, found themselves overshadowed by a merchant whose wealth exceeded their own and whose access to the king rivaled that of the most privileged courtiers. The economic power that Coeur wielded through his international trade networks represented a fundamental challenge to the established social order of medieval Europe. His success demonstrated that commercial acumen and entrepreneurial vision could generate wealth and influence that competed directly with the traditional sources of aristocratic power. This realization created deep anxieties among nobles who recognized that their own positions might be threatened by the emergence of a new class of wealthy merchants. The complex web of credit and debt that connected Coeur's business empire to the royal court and various noble households provided his enemies with potential weapons that could be used against him when the political climate shifted. Many of the kingdom's most powerful figures owed substantial sums to Coeur, creating resentments that could easily transform into accusations of exploitation or improper business practices when circumstances became favorable for attack. Agnes Sorel, the king's beloved mistress, had become both an ally and a potential vulnerability for Jacques Coeur, whose business relationships with the royal court inevitably involved him in the intimate politics of palace life. Her influence over King Charles VII provided additional channels for Coeur's commercial and political activities, but also exposed him to the dangerous currents of romantic and sexual politics that could destroy reputations and careers with sudden, devastating efficiency. when Agnes Sorel died unexpectedly in February of 1450. The circumstances of her death immediately became the subject of intense speculation and political maneuvering. Her symptoms, which included severe abdominal pain and rapid decline, suggested the possibility of poisoning to minds already primed for suspicion and conspiracy theories. The timing of her death, occurring at a moment when various court factions were maneuvering for advantage, made her demise a potential weapon for those seeking to eliminate their enemies. Jacques Coeur's enemies recognized the opportunity that Agnes Sorel's death presented, understanding that accusations of murder could provide the pretext for destroying a man whose success had become an intolerable challenge to their own positions and privileges. The charge of poisoning carried enormous emotional weight, playing on deep-seated fears about the vulnerability of the powerful to assassination by those seeking to advance their own interests through violence. The formal accusation against Jacques Coeur alleged not only that he had poisoned Agnes Sorel, but also that he had systematically embezzled funds from the royal treasury, using his position as master of the royal mint to enrich himself at the expense of the crown. These charges, while almost certainly fabricated, were crafted with sufficient sophistication to exploit existing suspicions about merchant loyalty and the potential conflicts between commercial interests and service to the realm. The trial of Jacques Coeur revealed the fundamental vulnerability of even the most successful merchants in a world dominated by hereditary nobility with the power to manipulate legal processes for political purposes. Despite his enormous wealth, his documented services to the crown, and his obvious importance to the French economy, Coeur found himself defenseless against accusations that were designed not to establish truth, but to provide legal justification for his destruction. The proceedings against Coeur unfolded with a predetermined outcome that demonstrated how medieval justice could be subordinated to political necessity when powerful interests aligned against an individual whose success threatened established hierarchies. Witnesses appeared to testify about financial irregularities and suspicious behavior. Their testimony carefully orchestrated to support charges that would justify the confiscation of Coeur's wealth and the elimination of his influence. King Charles VII, despite his personal debt to Jacques Coeur and his knowledge of the merchant's loyal service, found himself unable or unwilling to protect his former ally against the coordinated assault by noble enemies who demanded Coeur's destruction. The king's abandonment of Coeur illustrated the ultimate limitations of royal favor in a system where monarchs remained dependent on aristocratic support and could not afford to alienate powerful nobles for the sake of even their most valuable servants. The confiscation of Jacques Coeur's assets provided a massive windfall for his enemies and their royal patron, demonstrating that the destruction of successful merchants could serve economic as well as political purposes. His palace, his ships, his trading posts, and his accumulated treasures were distributed among those who had orchestrated his downfall, effectively rewarding conspiracy and legal manipulation while eliminating one of medieval Europe's most innovative and successful businessmen. The sentence of exile that ultimately saved Jacques Coeur's life came only after his wealth had been stripped away and his commercial empire dismantled by those who had benefited from his destruction. His escape from France marked the end of one of the most remarkable careers in medieval commercial history, but also demonstrated the resilience and adaptability that had originally lifted him from provincial obscurity to international prominence. Even in exile, Jacques Coeur's skills and connections proved valuable to other rulers who recognized his talents and were willing to overlook the political charges that had destroyed his position in France. His later service to the Pope and his involvement in Mediterranean politics showed that commercial genius and diplomatic ability could transcend national boundaries and survive even the most devastating political reversals. The legacy of Jacques Coeur's rise and fall resonated throughout the commercial communities of medieval Europe, providing both inspiration and warning for ambitious merchants who sought to follow in his footsteps. His story demonstrated that extraordinary success was possible for those with sufficient skill, vision, and determination, but also revealed the constant dangers that threatened merchants who achieved enough prominence to challenge traditional power structures. The destruction of Jacques Coeur represented more than the fall of a single individual. It marked a temporary victory for conservative forces determined to maintain the supremacy of hereditary nobility over the emerging merchant class. Yet the commercial innovations and international networks that Kerr had pioneered continued to influence European trade, demonstrating that economic progress could survive even determined efforts to suppress it through political persecution. As you reflect on the extraordinary career of Jacques Kerr, from his humble beginnings in his father's first shop to his magnificent palace and international commercial empire, and finally to his dramatic fall in exile, you encounter a story that reveals the complex tensions between tradition and innovation that defined medieval society. His achievements demonstrated the potential for individual merit and commercial genius to transform social hierarchies, while his destruction illustrated the powerful forces that resisted such changes and the ultimate fragility of success built in opposition to established privilege. The merchant prince who had once dined with kings and controlled trade routes spanning continents died in exile, his commercial empire scattered, and his political influence destroyed by those who could not tolerate the challenge his success represented to their own inherited positions. Yet his story continues to illuminate the dynamic forces that were gradually transforming medieval Europe, preparing the way for the commercial revolutions that would eventually reshape the entire structure of European society. From the grand politics and international commerce of Jacques Kerr's world, we now turn to a mystery hidden beneath the soil of countless European villages, one that reveals secrets about medieval community life that written records never captured. In recent decades, archaeologists have uncovered evidence of sophisticated communal systems that govern the most basic human need, the daily bread that sustained medieval society. These discoveries challenge our understanding of how medieval communities organize themselves and hint at complex social relationships that bound villages together in ways we are only beginning to comprehend. Picture yourself standing in a field in rural England, perhaps in the Cotswolds or the Yorkshire Dales, where modern development has yet to disturb the subtle traces of medieval life that lie just beneath the surface. The landscape appears peaceful and unremarkable to casual observation, marked only by the gentle undulations of ancient field boundaries and the occasional scatter of weathered stones that might once have been part of forgotten buildings. Yet sophisticated archaeological techniques reveal a hidden world of community organization that functioned with remarkable efficiency for centuries before vanishing almost completely from historical memory. The first clues emerge as archaeologists carefully remove layers of accumulated soil, revealing the massive stone foundations of structures that dwarf the modest cottages typically associated with medieval village life. These bread ovens, as they have come to be known, represent engineering achievements that required substantial community investment and sophisticated understanding of thermodynamics. Some measure more than 12 feet in diameter, with walls constructed from carefully selected stones that could withstand repeated heating and cooling cycles across decades of continuous use. The construction of these ovens required knowledge and skills that challenge modern assumptions about medieval technological capabilities. The builders understood principles of heat retention and distribution that allowed these massive structures to maintain baking temperatures for hours after the fires had burned down to embers. The dome-shaped chambers, with their precisely calculated proportions, created internal environments that could bake hundreds of loaves simultaneously while using fuel resources efficiently in a world where wood and other combustible materials were precious commodities. Archaeological evidence suggests that these ovens operated according to carefully orchestrated schedules that governed the rhythm of village life in ways that extended far beyond simple food preparation. Chemical analysis of residual organic matter embedded in the oven floors reveals patterns of use that indicate systematic rotation of different types of baking throughout weekly and seasonal cycles. The residues tell stories of bread production, but also of meat roasting, ale brewing, and even industrial activities that took advantage of the oven's intense heat during specific times when food preparation was not the primary concern. The social implications of these communal baking systems become apparent when archaeologists examine the spatial relationships between ovens and surrounding domestic structures. Village layouts reveal careful planning that ensured equitable access to baking facilities while maintaining clear hierarchies that reflected the complex social stratification of medieval rural communities. The positioning of ovens, often in central locations that required families to traverse public spaces during their baking activities, suggests that bread production served important social functions beyond mere sustenance. Medieval documents, when they reference these communal systems at all, hint at elaborate protocols that govern access to baking facilities. Families appear to have been assigned specific days or times for their bread production, with rotation schedules that took into account social status, family size, seasonal obligations, and a complex web of relationships that bound village communities together. These arrangements required sophisticated coordination and community consensus that speaks to levels of social organization rarely acknowledged in traditional histories focused on the activities of nobles and clergy. The mystery deepens when archaeologists examine the ritual deposits discovered in association with many medieval bread ovens. Deliberately buried objects, coins, pottery vessels, personal ornaments, and sometimes animal remains suggest that these structures held significance that extended far beyond their practical utility. The placement of these deposits, often at crucial points in the oven's construction or during periods of renovation, indicates that medieval communities viewed their baking facilities as something approaching sacred spaces that required spiritual protection and blessing. Regional variations in oven construction and associated ritual practices reveal the diversity of medieval community organization across different parts of Europe. Ovens discovered in Germanic regions showed different architectural features and associated artifact patterns compared to those found in Celtic areas or Mediterranean contexts, suggesting that communal baking systems reflected deep cultural traditions that varied significantly across the medieval European landscape. These differences challenge assumptions about the uniformity of medieval rural life and demonstrate the persistence of local customs within the broader framework of feudal society. The technical sophistication of medieval bread production becomes apparent through detailed analysis of the tools and equipment associated with these communal ovens. Specialized wooden peels for inserting and removing loaves, carefully designed to handle the extreme heat of active ovens, show patterns that indicate decades of regular use. Stone and ceramic vessels designed for specific aspects of bread preparation reveal understanding of chemistry and physics that enabled medieval bakers to produce consistent results despite the challenges of working with natural materials and variable fuel sources. Temperature management in these ovens required skills passed down through generations of village bakers who understood the subtle indicators that revealed when conditions were optimal for different types of baking. The color and behavior of flames, the sound of wood crackling in the combustion chamber, the feel of heat radiating from oven walls. These sensory cues allowed medieval bakers to gauge temperatures with remarkable precision despite lacking modern measuring instruments. This knowledge represented a form of scientific understanding that was entirely practical and experiential rather than theoretical. The fuel requirements for operating these massive ovens reveal another dimension of medieval community organization, as villages needed to coordinate the collection, preparation, and distribution of combustible materials on a scale that required cooperative effort and long-term planning. Archaeological evidence suggests that some communities maintained dedicated woodlets specifically for oven fuel, managed according to sustainable harvesting practices that ensured adequate supplies across multiple generations. The ashes produced by oven fires, rich in potash and other minerals, were carefully collected and redistributed to village gardens, creating closed-loop systems that maximize the utility of every resource. Seasonal patterns of oven use, revealed through analysis of charcoal deposits and food residues, demonstrate how medieval communities adapted their baking practices to take advantage of agricultural cycles and resource availability. Harvest times brought intensive periods of bread production as communities processed enormous quantities of grain into forms suitable for long-term storage. Winter months saw different patterns of use, as ovens provided supplementary heating for village centers while maintaining their primary function of bread production during the long, cold months when other food sources were scarce. The sudden abandonment of these communal baking systems in the late medieval period presents one of the most intriguing aspects of this archaeological mystery. Villages that had operated sophisticated bread ovens for centuries appear to have ceased using them within relatively brief periods, often leaving the massive structures to decay without apparent efforts at maintenance or repair. The timing of these abandonment events, clustering around periods of social upheaval, such as the Black Death and its aftermath, suggest connections between community baking systems and broader patterns of medieval social organization. Economic factors likely played crucial roles in the decline of communal baking, as the emergence of professional bakers and commercial bakeries offered alternatives to the community-managed systems that had sustained villages for generations. The rise of market towns with specialized food production created competition for traditional village baking arrangements, while changing patterns of land ownership and agricultural organization may have disrupted the social consensus necessary to maintain communal facilities. Disease outbreaks, particularly the devastating plagues that swept through Europe during the 14th and 15th centuries, decimated village populations and disrupted the social networks that had made communal baking possible. Communities that lost significant portions of their population through death or migration may have lacked the human resources necessary to maintain complex cooperative systems, forcing survivors to adopt simpler, more individualized approaches to bread production that required less coordination and community investment. The transformation of medieval agriculture during the late medieval period, including the gradual shift away from traditional feudal arrangements and the emergence of new forms of land tenure, may have undermined the social foundations that had supported communal baking systems. As villages became more integrated into broader market economies and less dependent on local self-sufficiency, the advantages of cooperative bread production may have been outweighed by the flexibility and convenience of purchasing bread from commercial producers. Archaeological evidence from the final periods of oven use sometimes shows signs of declining maintenance and improvised repairs that suggest communities were struggling to maintain facilities that had once been sources of pride and central to village identity. The quality of construction in later renovations often falls short of the standards evident in original building phases, indicating either declining resources or loss of the specialized knowledge necessary to properly maintain these sophisticated structures. The disappearance of communal bread ovens represents more than simply a change in food production technology. It marks the end of social systems that had fostered cooperation, shared responsibility, and community identity for centuries. The loss of these gathering places, where villagers regularly interacted during the essential task of bread production, may have contributed to the atomization of rural communities and the weakening of social bonds that had previously provided support networks during times of crisis and hardship. Modern attempts to understand and recreate medieval baking techniques, using reconstructed ovens based on archaeological evidence, have revealed the remarkable efficiency and sophistication of these ancient systems. Experimental archaeology demonstrates that properly operated communal ovens could produce superior bread while using less fuel than smaller, individual ovens, confirming that medieval communities had developed genuinely optimal solutions to their food production challenges. The study of medieval bread ovens continues to yield new insights into the daily lives of ordinary people whose experiences were rarely recorded in the written documents that form the basis of traditional historical scholarship. Each excavation reveals additional details about community organization, technological innovation, and social cooperation that challenge romantic notions of simple peasant life, while demonstrating the remarkable ingenuity with which medieval people solved the practical problems of survival and community maintenance. As you contemplate these archaeological mysteries, buried beneath centuries of accumulated soil and forgotten by the communities that once depended on them, you encounter tangible evidence of medieval life that speaks directly across the centuries without the filter of literate elites who created most surviving historical records. These silent stones and accumulated ashes preserve stories of cooperation, innovation, and community spirit that remind us that the medieval past was far more complex and sophisticated than popular stereotypes suggest. The lost art of communal baking represents just one example of the many social systems and technological achievements that disappeared during the transformation of medieval Europe into the early modern world. Understanding these losses helps us appreciate both the achievements of our ancestors and the ongoing challenges of maintaining community solidarity and cooperative institutions in societies increasingly organized around individual rather than collective interests. From the archaeological mysteries of village bread ovens, we now ascend to the pinnacle of medieval society, entering the great kitchen of a 14th century English manor house, where the preparation of a single feast required the coordinated efforts of dozens of specialized servants operating in a world of luxury that most peasants couldn't even imagine. Here, in these vast, smoky chambers filled with the sounds of chopping, grinding, and bubbling cauldrons, food became theater, elaborate performances of wealth, power, and social dominance that transformed simple sustenance into complex displays of aristocratic superiority. Picture yourself stepping through the heavy wooden doors that separate the great kitchen from the manor's main living quarters, immediately enveloped by waves of heat radiating from massive fireplaces that burn continuously throughout the day and night. The air shimmers with warmth that would be oppressive in any other context, but here serves as the driving force behind culinary productions that rival military campaigns in their complexity and coordination. The stone walls, blackened by decades of smoke and grease, echo with the sounds of organized activity that never truly ceases, as the demands of noble dining require constant preparation even during hours when the lord and his family sleep peacefully in their luxurious chambers. The head cook, a figure of considerable authority within the manor's hierarchy, commands this culinary army with the skill and precision of a seasoned general directing troops in battle. His knowledge encompasses not only the technical aspects of food preparation, but also the intricate protocols that govern every aspect of aristocratic dining. He understands which spices must be reserved exclusively for the lord's table, which cuts of meat reflect appropriate social distinctions, and how the timing of each dish must coordinate with the elaborate rituals that surround noble feasting. Under his watchful supervision, a small army of kitchen servants performs specialized tasks that reveal the incredible complexity hidden behind even the simplest aristocratic meal. Scullery boys, their faces flushed from constant exposure to heat and steam, maintain the enormous fires that provide both cooking heat and the hot water essential for cleaning the endless succession of pots, pans, and serving vessels that facilitate noble dining. Their work begins before dawn and continues long after the last noble has retired, as the kitchen must be prepared for the next day's culinary challenges before the current day's responsibilities are fully complete. The spice room, secured with heavy locks and guarded as carefully as the manor's treasury, contains ingredients worth more than most peasant families could earn in several lifetimes. Cinnamon bark, transported from distant Ceylon through trade routes that span continents, commands prices that reflect both its exotic origins and the enormous risks involved in bringing it to European markets. Cloves from Moluccas, their intense fragrance filling the air when containers are opened, represent investments that could purchase substantial amounts of land or livestock in the local economy. Long pepper, more prized than the black pepper that would eventually replace it in European cuisine, arrives in carefully wrapped bundles that are weighed and measured with precision equal to precious metals. A single ounce of this exotic spice contains enough value to feed a peasant family for weeks. It might be used lavishly in a single sauce designed to accompany the lord's roasted peacock or elaborately prepared swan. The casual use of such expensive ingredients serves as a deliberate display of wealth that reinforces social hierarchies through the simple act of seasoning food. Sugar, arriving from Mediterranean islands in massive crystalline loaves that resemble white rocks, occupies a position of almost mythical luxury in the medieval culinary world. So valuable that it's stored alongside silver and gold in the manor's most secure chambers. Sugar transforms ordinary fruits and simple preparations into exotic delicacies that demonstrate the Lord's ability to command resources from the farthest reaches of the known world. The techniques for working with sugar, cutting and shaping these precious loaves into usable portions, represent specialized knowledge that enhances the status of those servants skilled enough to handle such valuable materials. The manor's fish ponds, artificially constructed bodies of water that require constant maintenance and careful management, provide fresh fish for the Lord's table while demonstrating his control over natural resources that extend far beyond traditional agricultural production. These aquatic gardens, stocked with carp, pike, and other species selected for both flavor and symbolic significance, represent investments in luxury that most peasant families could never contemplate. The fish swim in waters enriched with carefully composted organic matter, fed special diets designed to enhance their flavor, and protected from predators by servants whose sole responsibility involves maintaining optimal conditions for aquatic livestock. Exotic birds, kept in gilded cages that serve as both practical housing and decorative elements within the manor's grounds, await their transformation into centerpieces for aristocratic feasts. Peacocks, their brilliant plumage preserved through elaborate preparation techniques, will be roasted and then redressed in their original feathers to create presentations that blur the boundaries between food and art. Swans, symbols of grace and aristocratic refinement, require specialized preparation methods that preserve their elegant appearance while ensuring optimal flavor for discriminating noble palates. The herb gardens that supply the manor's kitchen rival the medicinal collections maintained by monastery infirmaries, containing both common culinary plants and exotic specimens that demonstrate the Lord's connections to international trade networks. Rosemary, sage, thyme, and other Mediterranean herbs grow alongside more unusual plants imported from distant regions. Herbs whose very presence in an English garden speaks to the global reach of aristocratic consumption and the elaborate supply chains that make such luxury possible. The protocols surrounding food safety in noble households reflect centuries of political paranoia and the constant awareness that culinary pleasures could easily become instruments of assassination. Every dish destined for the Lord's table must be tasted by designated servants who risk their lives to ensure their master's safety. These food tasters, chosen for their loyalty and expendability, represent the dark underbelly of aristocratic dining, where pleasure and paranoia intertwine in ways that would be unthinkable in more egalitarian social settings. The elaborate hierarchy that governs kitchen operations mirrors the rigid social stratification that defines medieval aristocratic society. Senior cooks, responsible for preparing the most important dishes, enjoy status and privileges that separate them significantly from the army of lesser servants who perform the more menial tasks essential for kitchen operations. These culinary aristocrats possess knowledge and skills that make them valuable assets, sometimes moving between noble households as their reputations spread throughout aristocratic networks. Apprentice cooks, learning their trade through years of careful observation and gradually increasing responsibility, represent investments in the future of aristocratic cuisine. Their training encompasses not only technical cooking skills, but also the complex social knowledge necessary to navigate the treacherous waters of noble household politics. Understanding which nobles prefer specific preparations, recognizing the subtle signs that indicate displeasure with culinary offerings, and maintaining the discretion essential for survival in environments where servants' lives depend on their master's whims. These skills prove as important as any technical culinary expertise. The preparation of a single elaborate feast requires planning and coordination that begins days or even weeks before the actual event. Exotic ingredients must be ordered from distant suppliers, allowing sufficient time for transportation across unreliable medieval road networks. Specialized equipment must be prepared and tested, ensuring that nothing will malfunction during the critical hours when noble guests expect perfection in every aspect of their dining experience. The menu itself requires careful consideration of seasonal availability, symbolic significance, and the complex social messages that different foods convey to sophisticated aristocratic audiences. On the day of a great feast, the kitchen transforms into a carefully choreographed performance where dozens of specialized workers execute precisely timed tasks that must coordinate perfectly to achieve success. Massive roasting spits, turned by kitchen boys whose arms ache from hours of continuous motion, slowly cook entire animals that will serve as centerpieces for aristocratic display. The heat from these enormous fires makes the kitchen almost unbearably hot. Yet work must continue regardless of physical discomfort, because failure to deliver expected culinary excellence could result in severe punishment for responsible servants. Sauces, the mark of sophisticated medieval cuisine, require constant attention from skilled cooks who understand the delicate balance of flavors, textures, and temperatures that separate aristocratic food from the simple preparations consumed by lower social classes. These complex mixtures, combining exotic spices with wines, vinegars, and other expensive ingredients, must be stirred continuously to prevent burning or separation. The knowledge required to create these culinary masterpieces represents years of training and experience that makes skilled sauce cooks valuable assets within noble households. The serving of aristocratic meals involves elaborate rituals that transform simple food consumption into complex social theater designed to reinforce hierarchies and demonstrate the Lord's superiority over both his guests and his servants. Each dish must be presented according to strict protocols that govern everything from the order of service to the specific vessels used for different types of food. The timing of each course requires precise coordination between kitchen staff and dining room servants who must work together to create seamless dining experiences that appear effortless despite requiring enormous behind-the-scenes coordination. The contrast between the luxurious final products and the harsh working conditions that create them illuminates the vast social gulfs that define medieval aristocratic society. Servants who prepare elaborate delicacies for noble consumption often survive on simple bread and pottage that would be considered inadequate for feeding livestock in wealthier households. Their hands, burned and scarred from constant exposure to open flames and boiling liquids, create beautiful presentations that nobles consume without any awareness of the physical suffering required to produce such culinary artistry. The waste generated by aristocratic dining represents another dimension of the social inequalities embedded in medieval food systems. Enormous quantities of expensive ingredients are discarded as servants strive to achieve the perfect presentations demanded by aristocratic aesthetics. Partially used exotic spices, rejected preparations that fail to meet exacting standards, and the remains of elaborate dishes that nobles barely touch all contribute to levels of waste that would horrify peasant families struggling to find adequate nutrition for their children. Kitchen accidents, inevitable in environments where large numbers of people work with open flames, boiling liquids, and sharp implements under intense time pressure, often result in severe injuries that receive minimal treatment and no compensation. Burns, cuts, and other workplace injuries are considered occupational hazards that servants must endure as part of their obligations to their aristocratic masters. The kitchen's dangerous working conditions, combined with the constant threat of punishment for culinary failures, create environments where servants' lives are routinely sacrificed for their master's dining pleasure. The specialized knowledge required for aristocratic cooking includes understanding not only technical preparation methods, but also the complex symbolic meanings associated with different foods, spices, and presentation styles. Certain dishes carry religious significance that makes them appropriate for specific occasions, but forbidden during others. The colors, shapes, and arrangements of food on serving platters communicate social messages that sophisticated noble diners read and interpret as carefully as written texts, making culinary presentation a form of visual communication that extends far beyond simple nutrition. Seasonal variations in aristocratic dining reflect both the practical limitations of medieval food preservation and the symbolic associations that connected specific foods with particular times of year. Spring feasts celebrate renewal and fertility through dishes that incorporate the first fresh herbs and vegetables of the growing season. while autumn banquets emphasize abundance and preparation for winter through elaborate meat dishes and preserved delicacies that demonstrate the household's resources and foresight. The cleaning and maintenance of kitchen equipment represents another dimension of the enormous labor investment required to sustain aristocratic dining standards. Copper pots and bronze serving vessels must be scoured until they shine, requiring hours of scrubbing with abrasive materials that leave servants' hands raw and bleeding. The wooden tables where food is prepared must be scraped clean and treated with salt and herbs to prevent contamination, while floors must be swept and mopped multiple times daily to maintain standards of cleanliness that protect both food quality and aristocratic health. As the day's cooking activities wind down and the last noble guests retire to their chambers, the kitchen staff begins the enormous task of cleaning and preparing for the next day's culinary challenges. Fires must be banked to ensure they can be quickly revived in the morning. Equipment must be cleaned and stored properly, and preparation for the following day's meals must begin even as exhausted servants struggle to complete the current day's responsibilities. The servants who collapse into their simple sleeping quarters after 18-hour days of intensive labor carry with them the satisfaction of having successfully navigated another day in service to their aristocratic masters, but also the knowledge that tomorrow will bring identical challenges requiring the same levels of skill, endurance, and dedication. Their lives, dedicated entirely to creating culinary experiences for people who view them as barely human, represent the hidden foundation upon which aristocratic luxury rested. Yet within this harsh system of exploitation and inequality, kitchen servants developed remarkable skills and knowledge that represent genuine achievements in culinary arts, food science, and organizational management. The techniques they perfected for managing large-scale food production, preserving exotic ingredients, and coordinating complex culinary operations contributed to European culinary traditions that continue to influence dining culture centuries later. The medieval noble's kitchen, with all its luxury and exploitation, its artistry and brutality, its innovation and waste, provides a window into the complex social relationships that defined aristocratic society and the enormous human costs of maintaining systems based on hereditary privilege and social inequality. As you drift toward rest, consider how every elaborate meal served in these grand kitchens represented not just culinary achievement, but also the convergence of global trade networks, sophisticated technical knowledge, and the unending labor of servants whose names history has forgotten, but whose skills and sacrifices made possible the dining experiences that defined aristocratic identity and social power. As our journey through the medieval world of food and labor draws to a close, we find ourselves far from where we began, yet profoundly connected to those earlier stories through the common thread of human need and ingenuity that runs throughout history. From the cramped cottages where peasant families struggled to transform raw grain into life-sustaining bread, to the magnificent commercial empire of Jacques Coeur, to the mysterious communal ovens that bound villages together, and finally to the elaborate culinary theaters of aristocratic kitchens, we have witnessed the remarkable complexity hidden behind every medieval meal. The peasant laboring in muddy fields, the merchant negotiating in distant markets, the village baker tending communal ovens, and the kitchen servant preparing exotic delicacies. Each played essential roles in the vast human machinery that sustained medieval civilization. Their stories remind us that the simple act of eating has never been simple at all, but rather the culmination of countless individual efforts, social systems, and cultural traditions that connect us across centuries to our common human experience. Tonight, as you settle into the comfort of your modern surroundings, surrounded by conveniences that medieval people could never have imagined, you carry with you the voices of those who labored in very different times, yet shared your fundamental human needs for sustenance, security, and meaning. The bread on medieval tables, whether coarse peasant loaves or delicate aristocratic delicacies, was always more than mere food. It was the physical embodiment of human cooperation, struggle, and achievement. Rest peacefully, knowing that the struggles and triumphs of the medieval past have helped shape the world that provides for your comfort and security. The ingenuity of medieval farmers, the ambitions of merchant princes, the cooperation of village communities, and even the elaborate excess of aristocratic kitchens all contributed to the long human journey that has brought us to our present moment of relative ease and abundance. Let the gentle rhythm of historical time carry you toward peaceful sleep, cradled by the knowledge that human resilience and creativity have overcome countless challenges and will continue to do so, meal by meal, day by day, generation by generation, in the eternal human story of survival, community, and hope.